Now, when you look at what is the other active ingredients, different organizations will promote one active over another. Some will say CHG, some won't really specify if iodine or CHG is better. So that's kind of across the board. It's not specific that way, but overall, guidelines are saying to use that dual active prep.
Clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now it's time to roll back and start the first case.
On this vendor spotlight, we are speaking with Jenna Lindsay, Clinical Applications Specialist, and Vinod Menon, Product Development Specialist with Solventum, formerly 3M Healthcare. You're definitely familiar with surgical prep, but did you know it could be innovated? It could be better. We're going to hear about it all today. I think people are going to be surprised about something that you might be taking for granted today.
I think you're right. I think we very often use prep every single day, but we don't really think about the science behind it. We don't think about what it's doing during the surgery or what it's even doing after the surgery and for how long it's continuing to work. And so to have those discussions and learn more about what the surgical prep is doing and the science behind making it effective, it's really fascinating, and you're going to learn a whole lot today.
All right, well, stay with us. We're going to be right back after a short break.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to First Case.
Today, Melanie and I are speaking with Jenna Lindsay, Clinical Applications Specialist, and Vinod Menon, Product Development Specialist with Solventum, formerly 3M Healthcare. We're going to be talking about 3M's SoluPrep S Sterile Antiseptic solution today. And just to give everybody a background, I know you're very familiar with 3M, but Solventum, formerly 3M Healthcare, creates breakthrough solutions for their customers' toughest challenges by pioneering game-changing innovations at the intersection of health, material, and data science to change patients' lives for the better, while enabling healthcare professionals to perform at their best. And we are going to be talking about one of those breakthrough solutions that's been pioneered. And Jenna and Vinod are going to be here to tell us all about it today. So I want to welcome you both to the podcast. Jenna, we'll start with you. Thanks so much for coming on the show. Maybe tell everybody a little bit about yourself and your role at Solventum.
Thanks, Justin. Like you said, I am Jenna Lindsay, and I'm a clinical applications specialist here at Solventum. I joined Solventum about 7 years ago, and prior to that, I was an operating room clinician. I worked as an OR circulator, as well as an educator, and also an OR manager. And when I came to Solventum, I'm really the voice of the customer. So since my background is OR nursing, I'm able to provide what our customers need, as well as then I provide education to our customers globally.
Yeah, such a critical role. And, when you're doing, pioneering, game-changing innovations, you definitely need the customer's involvement and insight. And so having somebody like yourself on the team who's really done that work, I think is so critical. We have a lot of conversations with innovative products, and I would say that this is definitely a central theme for the ones that have been successful. So I love your role. Thanks so much for your background. And then Vinod, how about yourself? What's your experience and your role at Solventum as well?
Yes, thank you, Justin. Yeah, my name is Vinod Menon. I've been with Solventum for 24 years now. My background is chemistry and polymer science. And I'm a lead product development specialist in the lab. My role is to invent, create, support, and promote products mainly in the area of antimicrobial prophylaxis.
It's so interesting that the two of you are joining us for this discussion because I can really see you on either end of the experience and development that goes into all of this, right? So the two of you collaborating and communicating has to be really critical to what you're doing every single day. Now, I know we're here to talk about one of the things that I'm sure that you've all worked on, which is 3M SoluPrep as sterile antiseptic solution. But what was really going on out there in the real world, Jenna, that led to this innovation?
Yeah, for the longest time, there's only been one prep on the market that contains CHG and alcohol. And our customers really haven't had an alternative to that. And so we wanted to bring our customers not only another CHG and alcohol surgical prep, but we wanted to give them a prep with some added solutions. You know, everyone preps in the operating room multiple times a day. Every day they do at least maybe anywhere from 2 to 5, depending on the caseload. And, you know, no matter what we do when we advance our healthcare, we're always still experiencing surgical site infections. And one of the things we can really do is focus on that skin prep. Because if you apply that antiseptic correctly, we always say that application equals efficacy. And so we wanted to bring another CHG alcohol prep to the market that really offered, some more added benefits.
Now, what about just kind of what's happening in the industry? And Melanie, you can chime in on this too, but like surgical site infections. I mean, I heard you say, Vinod, very clearly that you're looking at antimicrobial solutions, right? And so how much of an impact is surgical site infection still, despite all this emphasis? Are you hearing from the customers that this is just still a constant challenge?
I will say that it is a constant challenge. Our CDC, they're monitoring SSIs and, every year or however often that they report out the data, SSIs are still a problem. And we have to make sure that we are doing our due diligence to help prevent those. No matter what we do, it's so multifactorial that you just can't pinpoint one specific thing that causes an SSI. So if we can help just in one thing or multiple things, I think we're helping our customers.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head right there because surgical site infections are a huge risk. And no, we don't know exactly what causes each and every one because there are so many different factors. But we can be responsible for our role in it. And we can make sure as OR nurses, when we're doing that surgical prep, that we are prepping correctly, that we're following the guidelines, that we are following best practice, evidence-based practice, so that our prep can be taken out of that list of risks for our patient. And that is so important that we take that seriously.
Absolutely. And I think one thing we didn't mention there is following the manufacturer's instructions for use. We really have to get back to looking at those labels because like I said earlier, proper application equals efficacy.
Exactly.
Yeah, you mentioned, standard of care and clinical guidelines. Like what's out there? Like what is it telling us that we need to be doing? Because you're also talking about reading those, manufacturer's instructions, and that's absolutely core. Like we have to know how to use the products that are coming into our hospitals, right? But what about what the industry is telling us in standards of care and clinical guidelines?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of different, clinical guidelines, recommendations out there. And from an overall perspective, you can say that in general, they will say to use a dual active antiseptic. A dual active means you have alcohol for the quick kill and then another active ingredient for the persistence. Now, when you look at what is the other active ingredients, different organizations will promote one active over another. Some will say CHG, some won't really specify if iodine or CHG is better. So that's kind of across the board. It's not specific that way. But overall, guidelines are saying to use that dual active prep.
So while we're talking about the clinical guidelines, Jenna, and looking at everything that's required to make sure that we are prepping correctly and doing our part to prevent surgical site infections, there are also guidelines that recommend the use of single-use containers versus not. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we really have transitioned, at least in the United States, to use those single-use applicators. When you use a multi-use bottle, let's say of a prepping solution, you do have the risk of contaminating that bottle if you maybe pour out the solution, recap it, and then go ahead and use it again. You really do have that risk of contaminating it. And these single-use applicators really, eliminate that potential. In the United States, at least, we really have moved to that single-use applicator, which is a great step.
Absolutely. I didn't realize how spoiled I was to that single-use applicator till I did surgery out of the country and I was mixing my prep myself with a large bottle. So yes, it is very different in other countries, but that single-use applicator really does prevent possible contamination, possible exposure. So Jenna, too, when we're thinking about preps, there's a dye in our prep so that we can see the surgical site, we can see what's been prepped, and we know that we've covered enough area so that we can have adequate decontamination of the skin. And when we are talking about 3M SoluPrep S sterile antiseptic solution, what thought process went into that process of creating the prep solution so that the dye would be visible on different patient skin tones?
Yeah, that's a great question. And like you said, the purpose of having a tinted solution is to make sure that you've covered the area that you need to prep, right? You want to make sure you don't miss an area. And so we have the color bright green as our prep. And people may remember that the competitor has two colors. They have an orange and a teal color. And that's really to address the wide variety of skin tones, where we chose one color to address that across the spectrum. And I really am going to hand it over to my colleague Vinod, who can really talk about the reasoning behind the green color.
Yes, thank you, Jenna. So primarily two reasons we picked the green as the tint for the 3M SoluPrep S sterile antiseptic solution. The first is visibility. So it's widely believed that human vision developed around the color green. So the color green lies right in the middle of the visible electromagnetic spectrum. And the sensorial elements, the sensory elements in the human eye are most keenly attuned to the yellow-green color. So that's one reason we picked green. So the second reason is that we wanted to pick a color that did not indicate any skin physiological conditions that were indicative of an underlying pathology. Like, for example, the color yellow is indicative of jaundiced skin, or the color red of inflamed skin, or the color blue of cyanotic skin. There is no simple skin condition that is green in color. So green is basically, it's agnostic of all common skin physiological conditions. So again, two primary reasons. One is visibility, and the other is to prevent confusion with any skin physiological condition.
Well, green's also my favorite color. So
mine too.
I can see. Is it really?
Yeah,
well, there we go. Vinod, I think that's really interesting, just about also calling it out to the sort of natural disposition or biology of how most people see colors. I think that is fascinating. I mean, having a color that's not associated with some other condition makes a ton of sense to me, just having the right association. But thinking that it also calls attention in sort of a real base biological way and really calls that out, that is fascinating to me. I'm almost like, how did you even figure that out?
It's Vinod for you.
No.
So let's also talk about some of the other features, like, coverage area. If we're going to be talking about like the color and making sure, are there some differences in that area as well?
Yeah, we do offer a larger coverage area than the leading CHG and alcohol surgical prep. So if you look at our 26 milliliter applicator, we are able to cover 60% more area than the competitor. And if you look at our 10.5 milliliter applicator, we actually cover 90% more than the competitor. So we do offer a pretty significant more amount of coverage area on the skin. And if you think about that, you know, when you're prepping a large portion of the body, that could lead to less applicators potentially.
Well, no, absolutely, because I prep on a regular basis and I almost always grab 2 prep sticks just to make sure I have enough prep, and that I can prep well without risking any contamination to the skin while I'm prepping. But I always grab 2 because I just want to make sure I have enough. So if I had an alternative solution that offered me a greater coverage area, then you could totally see where you could reduce the number of prep sticks used. That's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really is an added benefit to have a larger coverage area than the leading CHG and alcohol surgical skin prep.
So I'd like to go back to really how we kicked off this conversation and Vinod's role in the development and really around antimicrobial benefits, right? And so I'm assuming that there has some additional antimicrobial efficacy that's involved with this prep solution. Is that true?
Well, yeah. So CHG in itself is a rapid, broad spectrum antiseptic. And we're able to demonstrate that we have 96 hours of persistence. And I'm going to hand it over to Vinod to talk about how we were able to demonstrate that.
Yeah, thank you, Jenna. So we strongly believe that in order for the extended persistence study to have clinical relevance, it should be done under conditions that mimic actual surgical use. So to that end, what we've done for our study is after application of the 3M SoluPrep as sterile antiseptic solution and after drying the prep, we subject the prep to a saline soak followed by multiple scrubs with a saline soaked sterile gauze. This was to mimic the physical and chemical challenges that would be encountered during the surgical journey. The prep was then monitored, or rather for 96 hours. Every 24 hours, it was tested for the microbial load. And at the end of 96 hours, what we noticed is that the prep was indeed very persistent. The microbial load in no case had reached the baseline levels for the individual participants. One of the reasons we think that we have this resistance wash-off is that we have an emollient in our composition. And the emollient is hydrophobic in nature. It's water repellent and it doesn't penetrate the skin. So when it dries down, it actually provides a water resistant barrier to the chlorhexidine gluconate on the skin. And that reduces the rate at which the prep gets washed off.
Well, that's really cool. I guess I never really thought about it. I'm just in the OR doing my job. And then we finish surgery and we, get the patient cleaned up. We've got the dressing on. And, you don't want your patient rolling out into PACU with their prep just all over whatever body part you've just worked on. And so we will try to scrub it or try to clean it. But knowing that it's actually still doing its job, even if we have tried to clean them up a little bit, is really good to know. There's a great peace of mind knowing that their skin is still protected, even if we do clean up the area a little bit before they go to the recovery room. That's really cool. So I'm really impressed with the research and the thought process and the studies that went into understanding and ensuring that 3M SoluPrep as sterile antiseptic solution had that persistence. But there's also more that it does in the operating room. I do a lot of orthopedics and we are using incise drapes a lot for our cases. And that adherence to the skin after you prep, when we put that drape down, how does the SoluPrep as sterile antiseptic solution work with that drape when it's put on the skin?
Yeah, so Vinod mentioned we have that added ingredient, the emollient. And the emollient is really what is helping that incise drape stay adhered throughout surgery. And it's very important for incise drapes to stay adhered throughout surgery, because if that incise drape lifts, you do have that potential for those bacteria or microbes to migrate into that surgical wound. And so I am going to have Vinod talk a little more about that emollient and how it helps keep that incise drape adhered to the skin.
Yes, thank you, Jenna. So the emollient really does two things. One is it, like I mentioned before, because it's hydrophobic, it creates the hydrophobic environment at the drape skin interface, preventing fluids from cutting into that space and lifting the drape. The second is, of course, what we spoke about earlier, which relates to the persistence, is that because we have this hydrophobic barrier, it also helps dissolve the chlorhexidine gluconate. Now, you got to remember that the drape is actually adhered to the chlorhexidine gluconate, which is adhered to the skin. So as long as that CHG layer remains undisturbed, the drape will remain stuck. And so the emollient, because of its hydrophobic nature, ensures that that happens throughout the surgical journey.
That's great insight, Vinod. And it's just obvious that a lot of thought went into this. And, I realize that the 3M SoluPrep as sterile antiseptic solution is an FDA approved sterile solution and sterile applicator. But I also kind of want to talk about the day to day, like what's the impact on the operations and like workflow? Like, how is this helping save time? I just know operating rooms are under a lot of stress. Staffing can be an issue, and just making sure that cases are going off without a hitch, or maybe as fast or faster than they ever have in the past to just kind of meet that demand. Does this come into play in terms of workflow efficiencies, Jenna?
Yeah, to a certain extent. We're not going to fix our staffing issues or anything like that with our applicator, but we really want to make sure the applicator is easy to use and intuitive. So if people have used our DuraPrep surgical solution in the past, it is the same applicator. And what we've done is we wanted to make sure it was convenient and it matched the workflow, right? So it's quick and easy. It's just you activate, you depress a cap on the end of the applicator on the 26 mil. On the 10.5, it's just a lever. And so after you activate the applicator, it's really pretty quick on when the solution is into the foam. And we really looked a lot at our foam on our applicator. And it's really designed to, minimize drip. So when you're applying the prep, you don't want to see it dripping and pooling very much. And so we really designed that sponge to not have to press very hard and to really make that application simple.
Well, why don't we just walk right through the process? Why don't you describe this? And I know we're also getting video. So if the audience is listening to this as an audio podcast, we're going to describe this really well, but also you can head on over to the website. We'll have some links in the description where you can watch a video of how to apply the prep. So that's definitely going to be available. We're also going to have a brochure available as bonus content. So if you've downloaded the First Case smartphone app for iPhone or Android and you just hit the gift box that's inside this episode, you'll be able to pull up some details on the brochure as well. And again, you can just go to the description to be able to watch the video. But yeah, Jenna, just kind of elaborate on what you were just telling us. How do you go through this entire process?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about the two different applicators briefly at the beginning, and then it's the same process for whatever size of applicator you're using. You just want to make sure you are only using the applicator on the correct size. So you don't want to expand beyond what the coverage area is for that applicator. So with the 26 milliliter, you have the cap, which you just depress to activate it, and then the solution flows into the sponge. With the 10.5 applicator, you have the lever, which you just depress and you'll hear kind of a crunch, and the fluid will flow into the sponge. Now, I'm going to use the 10.5 milliliter to show you just because it's smaller and my video isn't very large. So when you're prepping with a CHG and alcohol prep, you want to make sure you are getting the entire area wet. So we're always going to start at the incision site or the cleanest area first. Now, in the past, people have been, in tune just to kind of paint or kind of start just at the incision site and work their way around in concentric circles. Now, with a CHG and alcohol prep, I really want you to think about having two zones. There's a zone 1, which would be the area that the drape, the aperture of the drape exposes the skin. So you don't just have the incision, the skin right around the incision exposed during surgery. You have a much larger area, right? And so you want to make sure you're getting that entire area wet, and you want that back and forth motion for 30 seconds on a dry site, 2 minutes on a moist site. And now you'll see I'm going horizontal back and forth and then vertical back and forth. And that's really just to make sure we're covering that entire area. We're getting that entire area wet and binding that CHG to the skin. That's very important. So after you have done that 30 seconds or 2 minutes in zone 1, that's when you can move out to zone 2 and go use that back and forth to get to either bedside to bedside, just to get that peripheral area that's not really exposed during surgery, but you still have to prep it. So once you go into zone 2, you cannot go back into zone 1. So if you think about if you miss a spot on the other prep, you would never just take your prep stick or your prepping solution and just go back to the middle, right, to the clean area. You would grab a new one. So think of once you go into zone 2 with that applicator, you cannot go back into zone 1. So you still have that clean area in zone 1 where you're really focused on. And then when you move to zone 2, that's, your expanded prep, the area that you still have to prep, but is not nearly as important or exposed during the surgical procedure.
And then how long does the prep have to dry before we can drape?
Yeah, that's great. For safety reasons, all alcohol-based preps have to dry for at least 3 minutes. Now, if you have alcohol in a very hairy area, it can take up to 1 hour to dry. And you just want to make sure you really have to use your assessment skills to ensure that it's dry. You want to make sure that you don't see any shiny, wet areas. But at a minimum, you have to have a 3-minute dry time.
So Jenna, that's awesome. I can really see your educator background coming out. That was such a phenomenal description. Even for those that aren't watching this on video and are listening on audio, I think they really got a clear message there. But you also mentioned something about CHG binding to the skin. And I know that there's some other elements to the development of this product, Vinod, that maybe you could speak to on that related to the binding.
Yeah, sure. So the surface of the skin is negatively charged, and that's because of the proteins and lipids that make up the brick and mortar structure of the skin. Now, when a negatively charged surface like that is exposed to chlorhexidine molecule has 2 positive charges. The chlorhexidine grabs onto the negative charges and neutralizes them. So it's sort of like a way of thinking about it is like static cling during laundry. So where static cling is mildly irritating when we are doing laundry, this is actually a protective feature when it comes to chlorhexidine. That bond, that electrostatic bond, is one of the strongest bonds in nature. So it's an extremely strong bond. It's very strongly bonded to the skin surface. The remaining chlorhexidine from the prep then forms a thin adherent film on the surface of the skin. And one way of thinking about this is that, when we talk about chlorhexidine gluconate, the gluconate portion of it is actually derived from glucose. It's a derivative of glucose. So the CHG solution behaves, or the chlorhexidine gluconate solution behaves in many ways like a sugar solution. When it dries down, it forms the same sort of film that a sugar solution would on a surface. And also similar to a sugar solution, it is very soluble. Chlorhexidine gluconate has a solubility of close to 80%. That's 80 grams of chlorhexidine gluconate dissolving in 20 grams of water. That is absolutely unbelievable. So what you want is you want to prevent that chlorhexidine gluconate from washing away too quickly. And that's where the emollient that we add to our composition comes in. Again, it forms a barrier to rapid wash off of the chlorhexidine gluconate. And even when all that is said and done and there's extensive exposure and the chlorhexidine eventually washes off, the amount of chlorhexidine that is left on the skin is sufficient because it's bonded very strongly to the skin to continue to protect. And that's where we get our extended persistence.
Wow. I'm just so educated. I'm learning so much. And this is fascinating just to hear all of the science that goes into this. I have one more question about prep because, Jenna, you are quite the OR educator and your skills shine through. But when we think about prep and we think about using CHG and alcohol on patients' skin, are there any areas of the body that we cannot prep with CHG and alcohol?
Yeah, anytime you have alcohol, you want to avoid mucous membranes and open wounds. Okay, so we shouldn't be using it as an internal prep. And then you really have to think about CHG. I would just be really cautious to use it around the eyes and the ears because it is toxic to both the eyes and the ears.
Got it.
I want to echo what you said, Melanie. Like, who would have thought surgical prep would be so interesting? I feel like there are certain products that we really take for granted. And a lot of times you don't even think that there's any room for innovation because you take it so much for granted. And honestly, I was very engaged during this conversation. I think it's incredibly interesting to hear the science behind it, Vinod, and how you have been able to innovate a product that, again, so many people take for granted. I do want to remind everyone that we have bonus content. If you've downloaded the smartphone app for iPhone and Android, we do have a brochure there. We will have a link in the description so you can watch the application video. You can follow Solventum on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and you can also connect with a Solventum representative at 3m.com/SoluPrepS. That's SoluPreps. And I really want to thank both of you for coming on and give you an opportunity to add anything before we wrap up. Vinod, we'll start with you. Really, really great job. And I love hearing the science behind what happens, when we're actually out there on the front lines.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. This has been, I'm very glad we had this opportunity to discuss the science with the audience.
You did a great job of explaining it, Vinod.
I know.
I gotta take my hat off to you.
You make it sound
very
so easy.
good at describing that, right? I'm sure it wasn't easy for you and your team, but you definitely make it sound easy.
Okay. Thank you.
And Jenna as well. Your educator role really, really shines, and you speak very precisely, but also very fluidly. And I thought you did a nice job of describing how to utilize 3M SoluPrep S sterile antiseptic solution. So great job today.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's important that our customers don't become complacent. They do it so much that everyone is an expert, even though you still do need some refreshers.
That was Jenna Lindsay, Clinical Application Specialist, and Vinod Menon, Product Development Specialist with Solventum, formerly 3M Healthcare, talking about 3M SoluPrep S Sterile Antiseptic Solution. And Melanie, honestly, I would have had no idea that this much science went into it. And even as I said, as we were closing out, just the whole idea that you could still innovate something that seems just, I don't want to say mundane, but just so regular, so routine that you could still bring more efficacy to the table and find, like the adherence and the antimicrobial, like the larger applicator makes a ton of sense to me, just when you're talking about coverage, but the antimicrobial piece and finding new ways to be more effective, it's really, really astounding. I thought Vinod did a great job of talking about that. And obviously Jenna's quite the educator.
Yeah, no, they made it sound so simple and so easy. And I think we always learn best when people can just really break it down to those levels that we really understand and take something that actually is very hard and make it sound like a no-brainer. But, that's also one of the really cool things about being in the operating room and being in healthcare is always changing. We are always moving forward. And even the most mundane, normal, everyday used item can be improved, and we can find new ways and find ways to make it better. And I think we learned about a lot of those ways today. And I was blown away by just everything that went into it.
Agreed, Melanie. Great conversation today. And I do want to remind everybody out there, if you haven't downloaded the First Case smartphone app for iPhone or Android, now is a great time to do so. And because we have bonus content available on the app, it is the 3M SoluPrep S Sterile Antiseptic Solution brochure that you'll be able to download, get some details. Just go to the episode on the First Case app, click on the gift box, and you'll be able to review it there. Also, you can watch the 3M SoluPrep Sterile Antiseptic application video by going on over to the website or looking for the link, which we will include in the description for this episode. And for all things Solventum, go to solventum.com and follow them on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. On behalf of Melanie and myself, thank you for listening to this Vendor Spotlight on First Case.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of First Case. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to First Case on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for First Case in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@firstcasemedia.com. We look forward to hearing from you.